Somebody over there. Oh, there's me over there.
Dave, I'm actually going to put us on mute simply because I'm going to be coming in and out, and I don't want to be disruptive. So.
Yeah, I was just thinking the same thing for us.
Is the lady here?
Hi, everybody. All the other sites out there, if you can hear me, we're going to start in 5 minutes. We're going to start at 11:05, okay?
All right. All right.
I really wanted to hear this.
didn't help.
Okay, all right, we're starting. I just want to welcome everybody here and our other folks from across the state to our life skills education group. Before I pass it off to Mary Brucker, who is in charge of our groups and does a great job, wave Mary.
Oh.
Yeah. I just want to go over a couple quick things, and she's going to introduce our speaker. Again, first off, this video is being recorded, just so everybody knows, so watch the language. Also, we are going to end it promptly at 12, but if it goes a little bit longer, that's fine. We have some other people coming in. Welcome, welcome. The other thing, too, if each site is able to, if you're able to mute your mic during the presentation, and you can unmute it, that would be very helpful. If you're unable to do that, just please try to stay as quiet as you can possibly be. Did everybody hear me? Is there any questions?
No.
Okay. All right. Well, I'm going to pass it over to Mary Brucker, and she's going to introduce our speaker.
Hi, everyone. It's great to see everyone. Which counties do we have? One.
Montgomery.
I think we got Cambria County, Lawrence County, CBVI, and Bucks County.
Oh, it's great to
Keystone.
Keystone. Okay, great to have all of you on.
How about Crawford County?
Crawford. Okay.
Hi, Bob. Well, I want to introduce Jim Antonacci. He will be speaking about legislation and how current legislation and how it impacts people who are blind or visually impaired, and he may also get into some previous legislation too. And he is the president of the National Federation of Pennsylvania. He has been the president there since 1999, and he is also on the scholarship, the National Scholarship Committee of the National Federation of Pennsylvania, because they offer college scholarships to blind students. Then he, in the past, also worked in the public school system as a teacher, and for several years he's been a government employee, and he was also a vocational rehab counselor at the Philadelphia Office of Blindness and Visual Services. I want to pass it on to Jim Antonacci now, and he'll be our speaker. Just one more thing. I think what he's going to do is going to discuss certain topics of legislation, and then there'll be a question and answer after each section. So I'll give it to you, Jim.
Thank you, Mary, and good morning, everyone. And it's wonderful to have people here today, both with me here in this office as well as throughout the state. And it is absolutely phenomenal. It's wonderful to see that people are taking an interest in what's going on and becoming knowledgeable as to the different things that are happening here. First of all, let me just very quickly explain that the National Federation of the Blind is indeed an organization of blind people ourselves that do many things. We try not to duplicate services. The associations for the blind here in Pennsylvania do an admirable job with many of the things that they do. So we don't duplicate their services, but at the same time what we do is we try to dovetail with them so that we can help in other areas. One of the things that NFB, or the National Federation of the Blind, does is that we work in legislative areas, although that is not primarily our function. That's one of the areas in which we do some of our work. I also have to explain, by the way, that if I use the word blind, okay, we have a sort of an all-encompassing definition of that word. The way we use that word is we say that any person who requires adaptive devices or methods to do what other people do with vision, we consider as blind. And it's just a lot easier than coming out with the blind and or visually impaired, over and over and over again. So if I say the word blind, I'm not talking only about people who see nothing, but all of us out there that have some vision left. So let's go to different things that we have done legislatively in the past. Very recently, a few years back, we did a thing called the Louis Braille coin. The federal government issues commemorative coins every year. And what happened was that for the anniversary of the birth of Louis Braille, what we did was we had a coin minted. It's actually a silver dollar, which is 90-some% silver. It's very, very high percentage of silver, highly polished, the whole bit. The federal government minted it and sold it. And what they did is that all the money over and above the minting costs, they then donated back on a match basis for projects learning Braille, especially for children. Now, what happens is the organization who did the project had to put up at least 50% of the cost, and of course the rest of the cost would be matched by the sale of the coin. So those are out there. People who are looking for some, I don't know how many we have. There's only a few, so we're not into, that's not our big thing, but you'll probably find them out there if you're looking around for some of them. The other thing more recently is we got changes to the Pedestrian Safety Enhancement Act. These are, now, by the way, both of these are federal legislation. The Pedestrian Safety Enhancement Act, what it did was it spoke to quiet cars. Now, people have been in cars that either are electric or they have electric motors, and their engines turn themselves off when they get down to about 10 miles an hour, or when they are idling at actually they don't idle, that's the thing. When they come up to a street and stop, their engines turn off. So you can't tell that they're there. What we also found out was that the children riding bicycles or runners who run early in the morning were getting hit by these things coming out, backing out of their driveways because they couldn't hear them. So what we did was we went to the federal government and said, we think that there should be some sort of a standard where these cars should make some sort of noise. Our suggestion is that they make a noise similar to a standard internal combustion engine, so that people could, would hear it and say, aha, that's a car. Well, at first the auto industry laughed at us and all that, but things came around, and so many people throughout the country. It became law, and now the federal government is going to provide standards, and at some time, very, very shortly in the future, you're going to see things come out, regulations come out that the different car manufacturers will have to follow in order to have these cars sold in the United States. So this is the type of thing that we are talking about, and the type of thing that we've been successful. Currently, the National Federation of the Blind has three basic legislative areas that we're working with. The first is legislation which we call, in fact, the acronym that we use is TIME, and TIME stands for Transition to integrated and meaningful employment. Now, here's what happens. Back in the 30s, there was legislation passed at the federal level which indicated that all people who were working had to be paid a minimum wage. And of course, the federal government has specified what the federal minimum wage is, and of course they update that from time to time. Well, think about the type of society we had in the late 30s, prior to the Second World War. Of course, we were just, we're still trying to recover from the Depression. Most people did not think that blind or disabled people could do much in productive employment. It was almost impossible for blind people to find jobs back at that time. So what happened was government said, well, let's at least get these people something. What the heck? Maybe what we'll do is we'll allow companies to get a certificate that says you don't have to pay a disabled person minimum wage. Well, that has persisted in the law even to this day. There are many companies out there who, because of the certificate, do not have to pay minimum wage. Now, from what I understand, almost no one in Pennsylvania, or at least none of the blind agencies that I'm aware of in Pennsylvania pays less than minimum wage. They're all very much up to snuff here. So we don't have a problem here, but there are other organizations who are still doing this. And in many parts of the country, if you're a blind person and you live in a specific locale, you either move hundreds of miles away from where you live, or you're told, well, the blind people, they work over there in that place. And of course, all they are just, less meaningful production jobs is below minimum. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to get these certificates to be withdrawn by the federal government. Now, we're not trying to do this immediately, okay? There are three levels. There is a level where governments have a certificate. There's a level where private employers have a certificate. And then there's a level where nonprofit employers have a certificate. What we're saying is that within the first year after passage, only the federal government, only the government employers would lose certificates. After the second, private employers would lose certificates. And then only after the third year would the nonprofits. So what we're looking for is that, what we're shooting for is that the private nonprofits who have certificates can then work with the people that they have in their facility now and get them up to a meaningful production standard and get them to actually have a meaningful wage just like other people in society. So this is what we're trying to do with this type of legislation. Now, what I would like to do is, before I move to other parts of legislation, is ask people if they have any questions concerning this legislative initiative that we're undertaking. Silence. That means that either everyone is sleeping or great job. Okay, we have a question over here. And what's your name?
No, my name is Doris.
Doris, okay. Go ahead, Doris.
I don't have a question. I would just like to make a comment. I've been following this wage business in the United States for quite some time. And it's, from what I can understand, is this. That forget about the government, because they're not going to do anything for you. It has broken down so badly that it's individual states that are trying to raise the minimum wage we're sightseeing people. Okay? And they're, in many states, they're making, less than $10 an hour. You know, $6 in one state, $8 in another state. It's going to be broken down into states, and the government will have nothing to do with it. They don't now.
Okay.
So I don't know whether that's a good move to break it down into individual states. And the reason why they're doing that is because the government is not participating in raising the wages.
Okay, well, to answer Doris's question now, or to expand on what she's indicated, different states and even areas within different states have different standards of living. So what may be a meaningful wage in one place in the country may be very, very low and under a meaningful wage in another part of the country. So in that sense, states, many different states have minimum wage provisions within their own state. So Doris, that's why that happens. What we're trying to do more than anything is, you see, from what I understand, the way legislation works is if there is a federal law which allows someone to, let's say in this case, pay under minimum wage, the federal law always supersedes any state law. So what would happen is, even though a state might say our minimum wage should be $8 or $9 an hour, people would still be able to pay less than that, okay, regardless, because the federal legislation supersedes state legislation. But what you're saying is that different states have their own minimum wages. In fact, I think Pennsylvania has a minimum wage which is higher than the federal level. But in either case, what we need to do is get the provision out of the law that allows blind and disabled people to be paid less. If we can do equal work, and if we, let's face it, folks, if we wish to be equal members of society, okay, then the way that starts is to get out there and do equal work. And if we're going to do equal work, then we should receive equal pay. Any other questions?
Yes, I have
Yes, I have a question.
Okay, we have a question on the conference line.
Yes, that's quite a simplification of that issue, wouldn't you say? If you can do equal work, why aren't you going outside of the nonprofit to look for employment? And where are people who have intellectual disabilities going to find employment?
All right, I don't know if that was heard, but the question was, is that a simplification, and how would people go out? Should they not be going out looking for work in the public sector, and how would we handle people with intellectual disabilities? Do I have the question correct? Okay, I guess
yes, that is correct.
All right. Basically, what we found is that within a specific area, people even with profound intellectual disabilities can in fact do some work, okay, over a certain amount of time, which basically is as productive as a person without a disability. The problem occurs is that in a sense, this is like type K. If people see a person who is blind or a person who is disabled and says, gee, that person can't do what other people do. They may be able to do what other people do within a specific framework. We may have to carve out a job which they can do. Remember, as Mary indicated, I was once a rehabilitation counselor. We did have a person who had an extremely low IQ and was also totally blind. However, this person was able to get a job with a museum, where what they did was they came in for 4 hours a day and they filled soda sodas from the machines or whatever and stack them up in slots so that people could pull them and go on and pay for them, that type of thing. So, and they were able to do that every day of the week, 5 days a week, 4 hours a day, and they made minimum wage at that. So it takes a little bit of conscious effort to sometimes find a job or carve out a job which a person can do, or it takes a good bit of training. And that's what these organizations are supposed to be doing. That's why they were given this exclusion in the first place. They were saying, well, while the person is not performing at this level, let's pay them for under minimum wage, but what your job is to train them and get them to work wage. And that's what they're supposed to be doing.
Okay.
All right, so we have more questions.
I think we're going to move on to another topic.
All right, we'll move
yeah,
on.
Just, you can save it for, I just want to get as many topics as we can.
All right, Dave, I'll let you be the timekeeper then. How's
Yeah,
that?
okay, yeah.
All right. The next of our legislative efforts is what we call the TEACH Act, and this is one of the acronyms. This is an acronym that it's got so many letters that my old brain here it never does get them all, but it has to do with technology education and for students in higher education. Now, what the federal government already provides is protection for students who are in K through 12, kindergarten through 12th grade, that everything that is available, excuse me? Okay. Is available to one student has to be available to a disabled child. However, once you finish 12th grade, that protection ceases. There is nothing for students in higher education. Now, here is what we're finding. Colleges and universities have gotten so technologically advanced that they are not thinking that some of this technology tends to leave blind students behind. For example, there was an extremely large university in the United States within the past few years, where if you were a student there, you would go to the library card catalog. Now, in those of us, probably most of us around the table are of the age bracket that we remember libraries where you go in and the card catalog was indeed that. They were cards, right? And the little drawers that you pulled out. Well, nowadays the card catalog is all electronic. You go into it with your computer. Well, this card catalog for this university was absolutely not accessible using one of the standard screen readers that blind people use to read a screen, computer screen. Furthermore, if you decided to find out if you could get help from the Disabled Student Services Office, you'd find out that that part of the website was also not accessible. Now, one would think that one should be. If you were in a class and you needed to answer a question, and what they have is, I find out nowadays, is that the teacher can give a quiz, and everybody has a little button that they hold in their hand, and they face this area of the classroom, and they press a button to do their answer. They call these things clickers. That the clickers were not accessible, so you couldn't take the test like everyone else. If you were a teacher, you couldn't in that university. You couldn't use what they call the smart podium, where you would connect your laptop and then have your lesson plans shown up on the board or whatever. So people don't write on boards anymore. I understand everything is done with the laptop. So these were the kinds of problems that we were facing. And what we did was we go to to the colleges and we say, you know, you need to make some changes here and do some of this. Well, first of all, is this something new? That's the big question. Okay, is there something that, you know, are we looking for something that already, that exists already or doesn't exist already? What's the status? Well, if you go back to about 1973 and you look at Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act, that's the Federal Rehabilitation Act, there is a clause in there which indicates that any organization who receives federal funds, especially through the Department of Education, must have all of its services accessible to people of all disabilities. Now, they don't say to people of disabilities who are in wheelchairs or people, you know, for this disability or that. They say all disabilities, and that includes blindness. So technically, people are, you would say, well, blind people are then protected under the law. Well, that may be true, but of course, protection under the law, the way things work in this country, is that if you have to go into an organization, find out that it's not, that they're not doing what they need to, and then the only way to fix it is to put in a complaint through the government, and then now you're in an adversarial relationship. We would prefer that not happen. So therefore, what we've done is we've come up with some legislation or legislation which we'd like to see enacted, which does not change anything and does not actually formulate absolute regulations, but instead would get the federal government through its access board that already exists to say, here are some voluntary guidelines which we believe colleges and universities should follow. And if you do this, then you will basically be accessible to people who are blind or visually impaired. Now, what we're trying to do is get this through Congress now, because what we feel is that this will then reduce the number of lawsuits and lawyers involved in this and that, and then the colleges and universities will have some clear idea of what everyone is doing and basically get together and then try to make college a much, much better experience for a person with a visual impairment. That's basically the crux of the TEACH Act. Do I have questions based on that?
As someone who's currently in school, how's that going to affect me now and in 4 years?
Okay. Now that's.
I'm Mitzi.
Oh, hi, Mitzi. Mitzi asks, currently in school now, as well as in the future. Well, Mitzi, if the TEACH Act were passed immediately, what would happen is that my guess is, depending on the amount of time that the government takes to formulate these guidelines, and then the time that it takes for the colleges to actually do it, I'm not 100% sure that it's going to make it within a period of time that you'll be in school. But at least we'll know that the people after you, will at least walk into a much better atmosphere. Now, let's hope, of course, that if the colleges agree to the guidelines quickly, then they'll start making changes quickly, because that's what we would prefer to see. Do we have other questions on this?
May I, please?
Yes, and your name is?
Evelyn Baptiste.
Hi, Evelyn.
Hi.
Go ahead.
Now, there is an establishment in Philadelphia, around 7th and Market or Chestnut, of which they train people, handicapped people, to work, train them for what their best capacity in that type of situation would be. After doing that, they then get them jobs. And how they get them jobs is because there's supposed to be a new ruling now that corporations have to hire 6% handicap. And so what happens is these people from these corporations come down to the school and say, do you have anybody? Do you have anybody? Because they have to have the 6%. And then when the employers hire these people, once you hire handicapped people, you also get some sort of a tax exemption. And also for people who are on disability, etc., after they find you this job, which could be at Comcast, different jobs like that, not just McDonald's. And after you work and they find that you are capable of keeping that job, stabilized on that job, then they might consider cutting down your disability, etc. But they're not going to take that away from you until you just fit it into that situation.
Okay. Now, Evelyn, you've come up with a number of parts of the question here now, but I think that's more apropos to the previous thing that we talked about. Let's say, I don't know, if we get into it only very quickly, first of all, I don't know that that here in this country that where you say 1% or whatever of disabled people. I don't think we have a quota system anywhere
Well, I now
here.
I now know of someone who's going there.
Right. Well, now there could be in different corporations. They may say we would like to hire this percent of disabled people or whatever, but that I think is voluntary.
I formerly worked after retiring from working for the state. I worked for state for 25 years.
Okay.
And you know I got the job? Huh? I had a lie to get the job. They never knew I had one eye.
Okay.
I faked my way through there and worked there 25 years.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. But
had I told them that I had one eye,
right,
which is what I have, I never would have got the job.
Okay. All right. Do we have other questions on teach, which has to do with higher education?
I had a question.
Go ahead, Mary.
Kind of following on to Mitzi's question. Now, this is for the future, but what about the students now who are experiencing lack of access for these certain technology, for the technology that's available now? Is there anything that could be done at present? I mean, of course, other than going through their Bureau of Blindness and Visual Services Agency, is there maybe a list of schools that are have more access, or have had more of an agreement with this technology?
Okay.
To become accessible?
All right. First of all, if the school where you are attending now, first of all, not everything is, I want to phrase this properly. Not everything is accessible out of the box, so to speak. In other words, if you need to access their website, obviously you need a computer. And ordinarily, the computer is not going to talk, nor is the website going to talk. There are pieces of accommodation that you need. Now, let's say that you need a screen reader, or you need something to enlarge the screen so that you can. There are things where the rehabilitation agency may help you if you are in the vocational rehabilitation program. Now, we don't want to get into all the regulations there or whatever, but that's probably a first step if that's what you're doing. However, what we're looking at, for example, is once we've already accessed reasonable accommodation, if there are still stumbling blocks, or if there's still things that are in the way, here is where you need to go to the school and say to the school, look, there's no way that this will work. You have this set up. It's not accessible. I need something which is accessible. We need to work out some type of accommodation. Now, what we generally say is this has to be the first line of work here. You need to go, you can't assume that the people know what's needed and how, what type of thing that they need to provide. This is where some negotiation takes place, and this is also where the Teach Act would be helpful, because you'll get some people, some blind person will say, look, you have to make everything so accessible that, first of all, I need to be led around by the hand from class to class, and somebody has to take all my notes for me, and somebody has to do all my studying for me, okay, and to the point where, you know, they're not doing almost anything on their own, okay? So, you know, where does accommodation, you know, what is reasonable and what isn't? The law says reasonable is whatever is in the mind of the judge trying the case. We would not like everything to go that way. So this is why under the Teach Act, what would happen is at least there would be guidelines so that a person who is at least competent and able to do what other students do would at least have equal access to what other students have. But again, the first thing you have to do is you need to go to the school and say, this is my problem. Can we fix this? Now, if the school is willing to do that and they're willing to do it on a timely basis, then obviously you don't have the problem anymore. If not, then obviously you have to take some action to advocate for yourself to get the school to do what they need to do. If that involves going to you know, family or friends or, you know, local legislators or attorneys or whatever, or even coming to, you know, one of the blindness organizations such as the National Federation of the Blind and saying, I need some help here, okay, that's the way in which you do it. And then at that point, you know, we can take it from there. But again, first step is always direct contact. Wonderful question, Mary. Anyone else?
I have a question.
Yes. Mary, you said?
My question is,
Marie.
Oh, Marie, go ahead.
Entrance. You're getting disability, you have a minimum income, and your desire is to take these courses. Are you adjusted on your repayment? How does that work?
I don't know if I understand the question.
To pay for your courses. Okay, so you're getting assistance from the Office of Vocational Rehabilitation, right?
Yes.
You're going to go to college and you want to take these courses. My question is, on paying for the courses that you're desiring to take, that you are passing and capable of doing, how do you return the finances to the school or the state? Do they adjust your from your income and the package that you receive from OVR, or how does that work financially?
I see. Okay. This is not necessarily in specific to the legislation, but I'll deal with it. Vocational rehabilitation in this country is probably one of the only federal funded areas which really is very much the way private industry should work, and that is they're spending money to save money. Here's what they do. The idea behind vocational rehabilitation is to say that, well, let's say that you make or you get I don't know, or let's pick a number, $700 and some a month in SSI. Now, if you were to, if vocational rehab were to train you, you know, help get you an education, and then help you get a decent paying job, then you might not be eligible for that $700 and some a month because you're making more in your job. Well, that means they not only save that money that they would normally have given you every month, but also you're paying taxes because you're a citizen out there working like everyone else, And in the long run, they will save all of that money month after month after month. And therefore, the money that they've put out is they get as a savings. So that's what they really do. They don't actually charge you for it. It's not like a giant loan that you have to pay back. You're paying it back by working as all the rest of the citizens work, and doing what you need to do, and therefore not getting either the federal funds or getting a reduced amount. That's how things are paid back.
Paid in full once you get a job, and you're getting a paycheck.
There is. Okay, what they do not do is they don't sit there and tally up how much money they've spent on you. They don't actually do that. The idea is to get the person out there in society as an equal member of society and doing what other people are doing. And at that point, the accounts are closed. So nobody sits there and says, gee, you have 5 more years to work before you've got it paid up. That's not the way they do it. So.
Hi, my name's Lori, and I had 2 daughters that are visually impaired. They went through college, and they got a lot of help from the disabilities office with note takers. BBS did help them. But the school did tell them, you can have all that stuff, but if you don't put the effort behind it, what are they going to do? They're no longer your parents. They're telling you, if you don't go to class, it's no skin off their nose. You got to put the work out or you're not going to get it done. And that's what kids need to be told nowadays.
Corey, I agree 1,000% here. What happens in many cases in education is that blind children throughout all of their time in school are followed by some teacher of the visually impaired who, they help prepare the lessons. They may put things into large print or Braille. They may help them with how they handle a test. They may get the books format, they do this, and all of a sudden 12th grade comes and they graduate and they go into college and there's no one to do all that for them. This is where a blind or visually impaired person needs to understand that it is indeed up to them to do these things for themselves, or at least figure out how to get them done, so that when they finally get out of college and move into the work world, that they now have the idea of how things are done. I believe if you were to, we have a director of an association for the blind sitting here at the table with us, and I'm sure that he will tell you that he believes that any blind person working for him needs to do just about as much work every week as the sighted people. Am I correct, Dave?
That is correct.
All right, and let's face it.
Whip out.
And the employer has a right to expect that you are going to do work for the. In fact, this is one of my axioms when I was a VR counselor. I used to say, no one gives you a job. No one is giving you anything. What you are trading, this is a trade. I'm trading my skills for their money. And it has to be an equal trade. And that's the only way it will work. Am I correct, Dave?
Sounds good.
All right. Any other questions on teach? And if not, we can move on.
Jim?
Yes.
I'm just going to jump in just for 1 second. Just for a time check, it's about 11:50.
Okay.
Why don't we go till about 12:10? So why don't you, if it's okay, why don't you summarize some of the other legislation?
This third one is quick.
And then why don't we, at the end, everybody can ask questions. Does that sound okay? So we can hear as much as we can while our time is. Okay.
This one is very quick. So, and I think they won't have a problem with this. This third area is only something that we're looking at in the future. There has been a treaty negotiated in the world called the Marrakesh Treaty. And what it does is it allows books that have been placed into accessible formats for the blind. That means whether it's Braille or audio or electronic formats, to be shared from country to country. Right now, that is not the case. What happens now is that if something is made into an accessible format here in the United States, it can only be shared in the United States. It can't be shared in other countries. Or if it's made accessible in Australia or England or someplace like that, we can't use it because of international copyright. What this treaty allows us to do is be able to trade these things. What has to happen is any treaty first needs to be approved by the Senate, and even before that happens here in the United States, what has to happen is any other legislation needs to go through the Judiciary Committee of the House before it can be accepted. So we're looking long term on this, but this will help blind people not just in the United States, but also in other parts of the country. And that's all we have to say about that initiative. So now, Dave indicates maybe we should take questions on any of the initiatives that we have come up with.
If you have any more, continue.
Okay. Well, let's ask, do we have things specific to the Marrakesh Treaty? Okay. That's one that's that we don't have. So let's see. One of the things that we're doing these are basically everything that I've indicated up until now has been on a federal level. Here in Pennsylvania, there is another. There are some other areas that we're looking at, and some of this, although you can call these legislative initiatives, don't necessarily mean that we're going to pass a law that says the government must do A, B, C, or whatever. We have some figures here. I have some figures from the Rehabilitation Services Administration in Washington, D.C., which indicate the amount of funding that has come into Pennsylvania through the rehab agency. Now, what happens is the federal government takes the amount of money which is going to be apportioned for rehab for the entire country, and then breaks it down and indicates to each state, well, here's the maximum that you're allowed to have. And the way in which that state gets that money is they put up a percentage of the money that they're spending, and then the rest of it comes from the federal government. Now, it's approximately an 80% and 20% split. So what happens is, let's say that Blindness and Visual Services purchases a computer for you for $100, and we all know that's crazy, but let's do the math, make the math easy. After they pay for that $100 computer, they can get $80 of that 100 back from the federal government through the Rehabilitation Services Administration. So that means it only costs the state $20. That's the way the split works. Well, now, what happens is that the Federal Rehab Agency adds up all those $80 here, there, whatever, and says at some point, okay, you've now received as much as we're willing to give you, so therefore, now that's as much as you can get. Within the past 3 years, let me give you some figures here. In the 2012 federal fiscal year, $132 million was appropriated to Pennsylvania for rehabilitation. Now, this is rehabilitation not only to the blind, but also general disability. Pennsylvania only used $122 million that year. In 2013, $129 million was appropriated. $111 million was used. In 2014, 126 million was appropriated. 122 million was actually used. That means that what was happening was in Pennsylvania, over the previous 3 federal fiscal years, they left $30 million out there with the federal government that they could have pulled in for people who are disabled in Pennsylvania. Now, again, that was a previous administration. Okay, that's not the administration we're in now. What we would like to see, obviously, is that the current administration were to fully fund rehabilitation here in Pennsylvania so that we can, the concept is, or the wording that they use is, draw down from the federal government all of the money which they can then use for services for disabled. By the way, in those numbers, if you were to say that in blindness services they get about 10%, that would mean instead, over the last 3 years, there would have been an extra $3 million approximately available for blindness services. And I'm sure that we could have found, good ways to use that instead of, I think many people have been told, well, gee, we've used our budget for this quarter and we need to wait for the next quarter or whatever. This would have forestalled that in a lot of cases. So this is probably the primary state area that we would like to see people work with. Any questions on any of this, folks?
Mary, do you have a question?
Well, I did, but I think you answered it.
Okay.
I was, we always come across this where BBS, for example, is always running out of money. And they gotta wait, consumers have to wait several months before they can get the services again until, when the money's restored. So.
There are also ways where money can be adjusted. I suggest, Mary, that if you come across people who are being told by their BBS counselor or whatever that, gee, there's no money in the budget right now, you have to wait until some other time. I suggest that what you do is you take it up to the next level. If you don't know how to reach the next level or whatever, feel free to give me a call at the NFB of Pennsylvania. We can say by rights what's supposed to happen is that if enough of these requests go into the district administrators, then they start looking out there and they try to figure out, gee, if maybe we have hit our budget limit, but there's another office that hasn't hit their budget limit, and maybe they can share part of theirs. Or if it's the other way around, maybe we can share ours. As I think Dave will tell you, and any of the administrators here and the associations for the blind, a budget is basically, and if everything goes perfectly, this is the way it'll work. But they're forever adjusting money from one thing to another so that everybody gets what they need. And that's the way a budget is supposed to work. Other questions?
Excuse me.
Yes, is that Evelyn?
Yes, it is.
Go ahead, Evelyn.
May I say, is that a sort of something like grants? They have like certain grants that are given to certain organizations, and they have this certain amount of money that they must, some instances they must use it right away. They must get rid of it, or else they won't get anything the next time.
Okay, if you don't, the federal funding that comes from the Rehabilitation Services Administration, if they don't use it this time, then they lose it for this year. However, they'll still get whatever is budgeted to them the following year. And it's primarily based on population, not fully, but primarily. So they don't lose. They don't lose in the following year if they don't use it all up. However, if they don't use it all up, then they have lost it for this year.
Yeah, that's what I'm speaking of. And so what some people who have jurisdiction over these grants and so forth, what they actually try to do is use it up.
That's correct. It is always best to use it up because let's face it, there are always things that we can use it for. How are we on time, Dave?
We got about, I'd say we're going to stop at 12:10. So do you want to open the floor up, or do you want to go over one more?
Well, we can do questions. That's our best bet, I think.
Jim,
Yes.
this is Elaine Welch.
Hi, Elaine. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Good. It's been a long time since I saw you back there in Bucks County.
It has been a long time. I wanted to follow up on, Mary had mentioned people waiting for services for a variety of reasons. And one of the things that concerns us is, you know, like you as advocates for blind people, are the very long waiting lists that exist in Pennsylvania for services. Not so much in VR, but in independent living older blind and for some other kinds of services. You know, we're concerned about that because in one particular district, it's 2 years for orientation and mobility. People in the ILOB program are literally dying before they get service. And one of the things that concerns us is that we do have organizations that provide orientation and mobility and rehabilitation. We have low vision clinics and those kinds of things. And we have instance after instance where a person has been put on a waiting list and has said, well, there's a PAB member agency in my backyard that has a qualified professional that can provide that service. And they were told, no, you can't, we can't do that. And we feel like, in fact, that has denied that customer choice, particularly in the VR program. What do you guys have a position on that, or what you think needs to be done in order to reduce the waiting list for customers in Pennsylvania?
Okay, first of all, let's make sure that everyone on the system here understands that the apples and the oranges here. There are, as Elaine has indicated, there are different funding streams that BVS needs to maintain. One funding stream is through Vocational Rehabilitation Services. That money comes from the federal government, and it is a very large pot of money compared to the others. Then there is Independent Living Older Blind. That is a federally subsidized program. It's basically a social service program, but it has, although it's federally subsidized, it is nowhere near the amount of money that comes in for vocational rehab. Then, of course, there is total state funding. Okay, now, no matter how you do it, the BVS needs to be able to work within its funding level. Now, if a person is receiving vocational rehab services, VR services, then there is very solidly, there is this area of client choice or consumer choice. And by the way, the actual word is informed choice. What has to happen is that the counselor should be sitting down and saying, okay, there are different places where you can get this service. You can get them through this agency in this manner, or through that agency in that manner, or through this private contractor in that manner. And at the same time, they are supposed to give to the customer some idea of how much service they would get and how it would work with that, as opposed, in one case rather than another. So all of this has to go into the idea of informed choice. But then under VR, what happens is once the person says, well, here's the way I'd like my service provided, then I believe they have to do that unless it is contraindicated and they really have to show why. Now, in Independent Living Older Blind, there are other areas where that can affect this. For example, if the person's income level in Independent Living Older Blind is over, 200% of the poverty level or something like that, then BVS may be prevented from purchasing services for them because they're prevented because of the income limitations. There may not be that income limitation under VR, for example, or there is not under VR. If, for example, the person is receiving SSI or SSDI, there is no level, poverty level that they have to see. So, this is where that can affect it. Also, they have to say, well, now, how can we work out the most amount of service to each individual customer? And if they were to spend, suppose they were to spend 4 hours of a mobility person's time, that could possibly buy someone else a low vision aid that they could use for the rest of their lives. So they sometimes need to balance that off. I am not privy to all of the funding that's available, but what I would say is this is where we probably need to go to our legislators and say, blind people here in Pennsylvania, really do need additional funding, and let's get these funding levels up. They've been flat funded for maybe the last eight or 9 years, and maybe we need to bump these up some. I think that would be a big help.
Yeah, I think more to the point, what I'm addressing is that there are customers in the VR program that have asked for choice and have been denied it. And I'm familiar with informed choice. The problem is that I don't see any indication that Pennsylvanians are getting informed choice. They are they're not told about the organizations in their local community, and when they're already aware of the local organizations in their community and say, I want my service here in my community, they're being denied. I understand that there's a standalone section in the Rehab Act that requires that every state have a written policy on how it will implement informed choice. And when I asked for a copy of it, I was told that Pennsylvania doesn't have one. Is this something that the NFB would be willing to advocate for? Is that Pennsylvania comply with federal regulations?
I agree that Pennsylvania should comply with all of the federal regulations under which they receive the income. What I tell people is if you are denied anything by your counselor and you believe that it's not correct, I suggest that they call me. I will tell you now, I won't agree with 100% of the people, but I will generally agree with most of them, and I will do my best. And our organization, the National Federation of the Blind of Pennsylvania, will do its best to see to it that we advocate with the rehab agency and get that person exactly what they need. And that word need is the important thing. It's not just what you like, it's what you need. And I'm telling you that I know of people in management right now in Pennsylvania's blindness and visual services area who have had to fight the agency for what they needed. And yet, they've risen to management level and they remember what it's like. And, they're going to see to it that people get what they can.
Well, thank you.
We have a question here at CBVI.
Go ahead. CBVI, go ahead.
Hello, my name is Levon, and this is a question I might have asked earlier, but when you were saying when you go back to work and you have a nice paying job, they will take you off for disability. And my question is, if I was to lose that nice paying job, would I still be able to collect or get back my disability?
All right, now, first of all, let's do this in a couple of parts here. If a person has received disability, Social Security disability now is what we're talking, not private, Social Security. If they receive Social Security disability specifically due to their vision, In other words, their vision is such that they are legally blind. Now, there is no such thing as legally blind in one eye. Okay, whoever's told you that one, that doesn't work that way. You are either legally blind or you're not, period. Now, if you are, you automatically qualify under disability as long as you have enough quarters paid in. So now if you're receiving disability, what happens is first of all, there's a thing called substantial gainful activity level, or SGA. The first thing is you need to be earning over the level of...
You keep going in and out.
Excuse me?
You
need to be earning over the SGA level before Social Security stops your benefits. Now, SGA, I always have to look it up, but it's somewhere between $1,700 a month or something like that gross for a blind person. So that means you think about it, you can make probably close to $400 a week and still be eligible. Anyway, you get over that, yes, they're going to take away your Social Security disability, but after what's called a trial work period. So there is a trial work period. Then when they take away your disability, what happens is if you find in the future that you can no longer do the job, then you go back to disability, okay? And then depending on, the big thing would be, of course, if you had 5 years of employment, then the most wonderful thing about that is it's probably at a higher level than what you, because minimum wages and all kinds of wages change as inflation happens. So what ends up occurring then is that hopefully you can get back on disability at a higher level than what you were getting before. So it is always positive to go out there and look for employment. That's definitely a plus.
How about we do one more question? Anybody have one more question?
Yeah, as a student with low vision, I sometimes find that there are things I need to do, like my computer works and my textbooks, which are now on the e-system with the e-books. How do I access things I need to do to help me be a better student in terms of seeing the screens and typing up my selections for my English courses and seeing my math books better and magnifying it and completing my work?
There are a number of access aids. For example, in computerization, if you're looking primarily at low vision, there is a thing called zoom text, which enlarges, makes the screen look larger. Let's face it, no piece of software is going to come in and grab your screen and actually stretch it. But what they do is that they enlarge all the characters on the screen, and then you move the screen around so that you can see things better on the screen. And if that works for you, that's one of the ways to do it. I understand that in the Microsoft operating system, there's also ways of just increasing font sizes, things like that. But if you are going to school and part of going to school, if you're going to school is covered through blindness and visual services, if it's part of your vocational goal, if you need access technology to help you in completing your courses, these are things that blindness and visual services should be providing. If it's what you need, then they should be providing it. It's what you need in order to complete your vocational goal, and that's what's necessary. So there are things out there, but of course you need to find out about them. And I believe conferences like this are how you do that. Other questions? Anybody else?
Okay. If no one has any more questions, I think we're going to close this out. But I was just wondering if all the agencies can announce themselves.
KBA is here, main office.
KBA in Crawford County.
CBVI. This is for the blind.
We're breaking up a little. Okay. Any others?
KBA in Lawrence County.
Okay, hello? And,
You want to say, Jim, you want to leave your information in case people want to?
Sure. If people would like to contact the National Federation of the Blind, and by the way, I am very interested in long wait times. In fact, I was at the Lions convention on Friday and Saturday, and some people from the western part of the state were indicating extremely long wait times, and we intend to look into this. But anyway, it's best if we can document. So if anyone has a problem or whatever, get to me. National Federation of the Blind of Pennsylvania, or NFB of PA, you can access us on the web. It's very simple, nfbp.org. So think of National Federation Blind and then P for Pennsylvania.org. All of our contact information is there. You can write to us at 1500 Walnut Street, Suite 200, Philadelphia, PA 19102. Or you can call at 215-988-0888. Again, 215-988-0888. And my email is pretty simple. It's president@nfbp.org. And I love to hear from people, and I will, if you don't get me right away, leave a message. I do get back to people. So if you have a problem, give us a call. Thank you, Dave. And we thank the Associations for the Blind here in Pennsylvania for having me today.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Hey, Jim, would you mind repeating that email address again one more time?
Sure. It's president@nfbp.org.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
And one more thing, the zip code for Philadelphia.
19102.
Thank you again. Okay, well, somebody's left the meeting. I don't know if we're done. Yep. Well, hey, I hope everybody enjoyed it. I thought that was one of the most informational